It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. The opening words to Charles Dickens's novel, A Tale of Two Cities, seems to be an appropriate description of 2019. It's been a year of despair, and it's been a year of hope. 2019 was a study in contrasts. On the one hand, in the U.S., it's been a tough year for the LGBTQ community. The Supreme Court heard arguments last year in 2 cases that will consider whether or not businesses can use religion as a reason to discriminate against employing LGBTQ people. The Supreme Court, which seems to be divided over the issue, is expected to render a decision this summer. So stay tuned. On the other hand, there was good news in 2019 in other parts of the world. Same-sex marriage became legal in Austria, Ecuador, and Taiwan, and the World Health Organization stopped classifying transgender people as mentally ill. On the one hand, last year saw the highest number of mass killings on record in the U.S., with 41 incidents claiming 211 lives. Firearms were the weapon in all but 8 of the mass killings. On the other hand, 47 gun safety bills were passed in 22 states and Washington, D.C. last year. On the one hand, although seeking asylum is lawful under the U.S. and international law, in the United States, Border Patrol agents apprehended undocumented migrants and asylum seekers in record numbers last year. On the other hand, even as they acknowledge immigration as one of the nation's most pressing problems, Americans still view immigration positively in general, with 76% describing it as a good thing for the country today and 19% as a bad thing, according to a Gallup poll in June 2019. Yes, 2019 was a study in contrasts. There was good news and there was bad news. And our gospel reading this morning is also a study in contrasts, with King Herod on one end of the spectrum and the Magi on the other end. King Herod was a sick, self-obsessed, paranoid ruler. Herod was ruthless, putting to death 3 of his own sons for suspicion of treason, as well as killing 1 of his 10 wives and a mother-in-law. In the last months of his life, he worried that nobody would mourn his own death, so he told his sister to have all the Jewish leaders in the land imprisoned in the hippodrome below his palace in Jericho. And so after carrying out his command, she asked, "Brother, why am I doing this?" And Herod said, "Well, I know that when I die, the Jews are going to rejoice, so I want to give them something to cry about." His plan was to have all the leaders executed in that hippodrome so that there would be thousands of households weeping when he died. This is the sort of person King Herod was. And it was this same person who would later call for the death of every male baby in Bethlehem under the age of 2 in an attempt to eliminate the Christ child whom he saw as a threat to his throne. And so, on the one hand, our gospel writer offers up Herod as an example of the very worst of humanity, contrasting him with the Magi, who are examples of goodness. Whereas Herod was noted for his ruthlessness, the Magi are presented as models of trust, even to the point of naivete, stopping to ask Herod for directions to the newborn king of the Jews. The Magi looked to the stars for guidance, whereas Herod wanted to be the star. The Magi traveled a great distance, took risks, and crossed boundaries to worship the Christ child. But Herod was only concerned with maintaining his status quo and holding on to power. The Magi embodied wonder and worship, while Herod's rule was characterized by terror and tension. The only goal of the Magi was to worship Christ, but Herod was only interested in others worshiping him. The birth of Christ stirred up awe and curiosity in the Magi, but left Herod feeling paranoid and fearful. Upon arriving at their final destination and finding Jesus, the Magi were overwhelmed with joy. But upon hearing of Jesus, Herod was overcome with fear. Yes, this morning's reading has much to offer the readers, but none more worthy of examination than the contrasts between Herod and the Magi. The story is about a crossroads of sorts. Will evil win, or will goodness and love win? Will Herod's plot to kill Jesus succeed, or will the Holy Family manage to escape to safety? What does the future hold for Jesus and his parents? I think these are the same sort of questions the church needs to be asking of itself as we stand at the crossroads of a new year. What does the future hold for us? In what direction will we go? We have a choice too, you see. On the one hand, we can continue to do things the way we have always done them, maintain the status quo, and like Herod, view with suspicion new people with new ideas. Or we can take risks, like the Magi, follow where the light of God appears to be leading us, and do so with wonder and awe. On the one hand, we can continue to measure our success with numbers, as we and other churches have done in the past. We can choose to measure, or we can choose to measure success with transformed lives. There's value in numbers. Numbers can tell us stories. For instance, we can find ourselves rejoicing over an increase in attendance, but if we aren't transforming those new attendees into disciples, then our church is nothing but a bunch of bench warmers. On the one hand, we can be a church that is concerned only with its own membership and perpetuating itself as an institution. Or we can extend our ministry to people outside our walls. We've made the decision to focus on the repair of our 109-year-old building because we believe God is calling us to remain where we are. But the danger that goes along with that sort of decision is ignoring the needs of others because all of our resources are going towards ourselves. Herod was only concerned with himself. We can be like Herod, or we can be like the Magi, whose focus was on the guiding light of God. As we tend to the needs of our building, we must never lose sight of the needs of the world around us. On the one hand, we can be a church that cloaks itself in an hour of liturgy and doctrine, or we can be one which seeks to be an example of love. Richard Rohr says, Any notion of a future church must be a fully practical church that is concerned about getting the job of love done, and done better and better. Centuries emphasizing art and architecture, music, liturgy, and prescribed roles have their place, he says, but their overemphasis has made us a very top-heavy and decorative church that is constantly concerned with its own in-house salvation. Rohr feels we need people of faith who are trained in, validated for, and encouraged to make home and hospital visits, do hospice work and jail ministry, support immigrants and refugees, help with soup kitchens or food pantries, and more, because after all, he points out, healing was most of the work Jesus did. This morning's story closes with the following sentence. The Magi were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, so they went back to their own country by another route. The church is at a crossroads, and we need to decide whether we will continue on the route by which we have arrived here, a popular route recommended by church growth experts, or do we continue on by another route, one where love in action takes precedence over an increase in numbers? Only time will tell. As we stand at this crossroads, may we continue to follow the light of God shining brightly in the night and providing guidance in times of uncertainty. And may we continue also to be the light in a world that needs the healing that only we can offer. Amen.